Well, I want to share with you in the next few moments on the topic, shake it off. Don't worry, I will not be singing any Taylor Swift, but there are some things we need to shake off. I remember being a kid at my grandparents' house and getting something out of their garage, and it was covered in dust. It was like, what is even under this? Like you had to shake it off to get the dust off. And there are some things in our life. There's some disappointment. There's some hurt. Maybe there's some discouragement. There's some things today that we're going to learn to shake off. We're going into the book of Acts, chapter 13, beginning in verse 42. We read, as Paul and Barnabas were leaving the synagogue, the people invited them to speak further about these things on the next Sabbath. When the congregation was dismissed, many of the Jews and devout converts to Judaism followed Paul and Barnabas, who talked with them and urged them to continue in the grace of God. You need to continue. You feel like giving up. You're so discouraged. You feel like throwing in the towel, but continue in the grace of God. On the next Sabbath, almost the whole city gathered to hear the word of the Lord. When the Jews saw the crowds, they were filled with jealousy. Oh, jealousy will destroy you from the inside out. It says that they began to contradict what Paul was saying and heaped abuse on him. Then Paul and Barnabas answered them boldly, we had to speak the word of the Lord to you first. Since you reject it, we now turn to the Gentiles. For this is what the Lord has commanded us. I have made you a light to the Gentiles, that you may bring salvation to the ends of the earth. Verse 49, the word of the Lord spread through the whole region, but the Jewish leaders incited the God-fearing women of high standing and the leading men of the city. They stirred up persecution against Paul and Barnabas and expelled them from the region. You ever been expelled? Maybe from school? But they're expelled from the region. So how did they respond? So they shook the dust off their feet as a warning to them and went to Iconium. And the disciples were filled with joy and with the Holy Spirit. To catch us up to what's taking place right now, in Acts chapter 7, we are introduced to Saul. When do we meet Saul? We meet him at Stephen's stoning, at the execution of Stephen, when Stephen is being murdered. Many believe that Saul was the one who gave the go-ahead because they were putting their coats, the people, as they were stoning Stephen, they were putting their coats at Saul's feet. Then in chapter 8, Saul is dragging believers, dragging followers of the way, dragging Christians, followers of Jesus, into prison. But then in chapter 9, everything changed. I want you to know, no matter what your story has been like up to this point, no matter how much harm you've done, no matter how many mistakes you've made, everything can change. And this chapter can be a significant, life-altering chapter in your life. It says, because in chapter 9, Saul, he had an encounter with God. Ooh, encounters with God can change everything. Encounters with God can alter your perspective. They can open your eyes to a whole new world, to a whole new pathway. But what you do after an encounter with God makes a difference. Because some people have an encounter with God and then they go back to their old life. They have an encounter with God, they go back to their old friends. They have an encounter with God, and they go back to their old ways. After an encounter with God, you need to get in the right environment. environment makes a difference. You've heard, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. So many people are a product of their environment after a God encounter. Get in the right environment, but then you need to give your full effort. It says that Saul, who would become Paul, that he began to preach boldly. You see, you need to begin to give your full effort. That's why at this church, at Faith, like we believe in having God encounters where people can come and they can encounter God's presence. And that we want to be a church, and we're committed to being a church where it is an environment for growth, where you can get connected, not just in your relationship with God, but with one another. But it also requires your effort. Not just to be on the sidelines watching this all happen, not just to be someone who's like, I'm there and I'm just watching this, but to actually make a difference and for you to give your effort. That's why we encourage people to serve, to get involved. And all the people were astonished at the transformation in Saul's life. Just like people are astonished at the transformation of people's lives in our church when they're like, wait, hold on. You used to be a drug addict for all those years. Wait, hold on. You used to live that lifestyle. And I'm looking at what God is doing in and through you now. And people can be astonished because God uses people that nobody expects. And it says that Paul became more and more powerful. You see, when you have that God encounter, you're in the right environment and you're giving your effort, you're seeing growth happen in your life. And yet, after 3 years, there was a conspiracy among the Jews to kill him. You see that happening in our culture today, where there's a conspiracy to not allow Christians to pray in certain places. There's a conspiracy in our culture today where you can't read certain portions of the Bible in certain states or in certain countries. There's this conspiracy to try to take out followers of Jesus. And so Paul, he went to Jerusalem. And he tried to join the disciples. It's like someone coming to faith and trying, I want to get involved. And they were like, no. They were scared of Paul because of his past. Just like some people, when they come to faith and you're wanting to get involved, you're like, wait, hold on. People are a little alarmed because of your past. But I love it because Barnabas speaks up for Paul and says, no. Listen, what he's saying is true. I've seen the transformation in his life. You just need one person to speak up on your behalf. And Saul, who would become Paul, he stayed. He is speaking and he is living boldly. It is time for, as followers of Jesus, for us to speak boldly and to live boldly. Enough of playing it safe. Too many followers of Jesus are playing it safe. Too many Christians, we're walking on eggshells because we're like, but if I say this, I might get canceled. Or if someone knows I go to church and I believe in this, that I might get fired from my job. I want you to boldly become who God has created and called you to be, but that's going to require shaking some things off. So now we step into chapter 13, and this is many years later. It's at the church in Antioch, and it says that they were worshiping. They are praying. They are fasting. It's many years later today, the church in America, the church in our nation, and is the church fasting and praying, or many years later now, and the church is filled with great technology. The church is filled with moving lights. The church is filled with smoke and fog machines, and the church is filled with quality music, and the church is maybe copying culture, where we're copying and we're taking bits from that movie, or we're redoing that song from culture. And whether or not that's right or whether or not that's wrong, our churches today, we need to be praying and fasting. And here at this church, we believe in the power of prayer. We believe in the power of fasting, and it is during when they are praying and they are fasting. It's not because of the quality of the lights and the moving lights and the fog. It is because of the prayer and the fasting. The Holy Spirit says, I have called Paul and Barnabas. I remember just a couple of weeks ago, Lindsay was looking at her phone and she's like, I have no reception. I can't get a call. I need to reach out and my phone is not working. Her SIM card was not working. There was no connection. The call requires connection. You might be thinking, I'm not called by God. Oh, yes, you are. You are called by God, but maybe what's lacking is you're not connected. I remember back in the day, the old school phones at the house, when you actually had to plug it into the jack in the wall. And remember, we had the long cords so that because this was before wireless phones and you wanted to go into the other room and you wanted to walk around the house and if it wasn't plugged in, you could have the phone, but you weren't gonna get the call. Now, the call on your life is initiated by God. I know there's times where we call on God. We're in trouble financially. God, I need you to be Jehovah Jireh. You're my provider. We call on God because one of our family members is sick. And it's like, God, I need you to be the healer. But when it comes to our purpose and destiny and reaching this world, the call comes from God. I wonder if right now you feel exhausted and worn out and you're calling on God, God, I need a vacation. And God is saying, no, I got a call on your life, and it's not to go on vacation. It's to get to work because I want to put you to work to make a difference in this world. I remember when God called my life. I didn't want to go into ministry. I didn't want to go into and start serving other people, but God called me. I remember I was younger and the first thing I did is I started volunteering and helping teach the fourth graders. And then it went to other things and then volunteering in youth. And you see the call of God I discovered because God called me. God is calling you to serve other people. What God is calling you to is calling for you. But there are some things you need to shake off. And so it's at this moment that the church there in Antioch, they fasted, they prayed, they laid their hands on Paul and Barnabas. The reason why they laid their hands on Paul and Barnabas was to set them apart. It's significant. We need to remember that as followers of Jesus, that when we're going into this world, that we are set apart. We're not to live like everyone else lives. We're not to do the things that everyone else does. This is significant because this is Paul's first missionary journey, and it was not the result of strategic planning. Strategic planning can be great, but this was the Spirit's initiative. As God is leading us into new areas, we are being Spirit-led. It's not just because of a slick strategy. In fact, we've discovered even just recently, sometimes things where we're going things, the strategy looks good, but is it God's Spirit leading us there? You see, strategic planning is a good thing, but it should not be the main thing. The strategy at our church, and I believe it should be this way in our lives, should be our diligence, but it should not be our full dependence. We prioritize prayer at this church, and we should prioritize prayer in our lives. Fasting, I mean, like when you look at it, prayer precedes the promotion, and fasting can take you into your future. And so right here, it is Paul's first missionary journey. There is something special about the first one. Do you remember, if you're a parent, when your kid took their very first step? It was like, whoa, their first step. I remember Lindsay and I, our first kiss. There's something special about when it's the first. And so you got Paul and you got Barnabas, and they have different strengths. You see, we need people who are different than us. Peter and John were great together, but they were so different. Lindsay and I believe we're great together, and we are so different. You remember when Jesus even sent out the disciples? He sent them out in pairs. And yet our culture, we look at things that are different and we want to divide. But we need diversity. I've heard it said that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. You see, together, we should complement one another, not compete with one another. Together, we should complement one another, not cancel one another, and we may need to shake some things off. So you get Paul and you get Barnabas, and they're sailing to Cyprus, and they come across a sorcerer who had gained influence as the governor's spiritual advisor. I just want to pause here and really emphasize that you need to be careful. I need to be careful who we listen to. Who do you listen to for financial advice? I have people I go to for financial advice. People who I see have made the kind of decisions, and now it's the result of the kind of life I want to have. They're the kind of people. Or my son, who's a licensed financial advisor and learned everything he knows from me. No, just kidding. Like who we go to financial advice. There's some people on social media, and it's like, if you take their advice, you are going to be a mess financially. Who do you take your relationship advice from? I mean, like, really? Like, you're taking it from you're going to, like, so many people, like, I was listening to what the Kardashians were saying on this. Now, if you decide that, okay, but, like, who do we take our relationship advice from? But who do we take our spiritual advice from? You see, even people who seem to be wise can give you wrong advice. And so the governor had asked to meet with Paul and Barnabas. And it's like, I want to hear God's word. I love this. Because even though he was getting bad advice, he was open to a different perspective. We're living in a culture where it's becoming less and less that people want to be open to hearing differing points of view. It's like, if you want truth, we need to learn to search for truth, not to stop truth. I am extremely concerned when things are just being stopped or eliminated, or you can't say this, or we're going to fact check that. Right now on social media, maybe some of it's good, maybe it's not. But wait, hold on. We need to learn to think for ourselves. Don't give your brain over to someone else and just take whatever they say as truth. We need to learn to look at the evidence. We need to learn to see, okay, wait, hold on. Who is giving the evidence? Who paid for that study? We need to begin to learn and look at, because the sorcerer was trying to prevent this from happening, just like people are trying to prevent things from happening, and he was using deceit or trickery. It's happening today. But I want you to know, truth isn't threatened. Paul rebuked him. He's like, you're a fraud. He says, you're going to lose your sight. He ended up losing his sight. And the governor was convinced by the message and the miracle. Sometimes the journey to God's truth can require overcoming the world's lies. And there are some things that we need to shake off. Paul and Barnabas, they sailed on. And John Mark, who had joined them when they set off on this journey, John Mark was with them until he wasn't. John Mark took off for Jerusalem. Paul was pissed. He was ticked. He was upset. It's like, what? Why are you leaving? Like, we see in chapter 15 that he was upset. And so some like people like walking out on the church today, people walking out on Lindsay and I, like come on, weak sauce. Like, is really like, wait, hold, like, why are you leaving? And I think some of us are stuck on people. Why'd they leave? And we're trying to figure things out. It's like they're gone. Or some of us are trying to hold on to people on their way out of our lives. It's like not everyone who is with us now is going to be with us forever. Maybe you need to let them go. Maybe I need to let them go. It was like, so they're on this journey. And now Paul, after being asked, he gives an incredible sermon, his first message in the book of Acts. It is powerful. It is full of instruction and inspiration. I don't just want to bring you inspiration. Sometimes people, it's like, just give me some inspiration. It's like, if you just want some fluff, like, go to Instagram and just look at some inspirational quotes. But like, we need to bring instruction. But sometimes there's instruction without inspiration. And it can be instruction and inspiration. And so Paul, he reviews Israelite history from the time of Egypt all the way to King David. He jumps 1,000 years to Jesus. You see, Paul was asked and he was ready. Many right now are pursuing opportunities that they're not prepared for. And if you got the opportunity, you would fail. Other people are praying for opportunities that they're not preparing for, and if they got it, they would fail. Some people are like, well, I'll prepare when the opportunity comes. No, prepare before the opportunity comes. Pressure will destroy what you're not prepared for. So maybe God at some point in the future wants to give you that opportunity, but he's ready, saying you need to get ready. And it's amazing because after this message, after this sermon, the people are begging. They're begging Paul, share more next Sabbath. I wish that happened in our churches today, rather than people leaving early at the end. Like they're staying. We want more. We want more. It's like, give us more. We want to grow. And so even after the service was done, the gathering was done, it's like many people, they kept following them. It's like, we want to go deeper. Oh, I wish that was the case. I wish that was the hunger among more people today. It's like, we want some depth. And so the next Sabbath, guess what? It's like almost the whole city arrives to the synagogue. They wanted to hear the word of the Lord. They weren't there for entertainment. They were there to be empowered. And yet some of the Jewish leaders were jealous. It's amazing what jealousy will do. It'll eat you alive from the inside out. That's why some of us, we need to get off social media. We need to stop watching that thing on YouTube, because we're looking at things, other people, and we're getting jealous. And so because of jealousy, they opposed Paul and Barnabas. They didn't just oppose them, they insulted them. You see it happening today with followers of Jesus. They were arguing over what they were saying. Here's the thing about Paul and Barnabas. They faced opposition early, and they faced opposition often. So if you think that following Jesus, there's not going to be any opposition, that Jesus is going to make a way there when there seems to be no way, oh yes, he will, but people will be trying to get in the way. But I wonder if we can live our lives as the great theologian Tom Petty once sang, well, I won't back down. No, I won't back down. You can stand me up at the gates of hell, but I won't back down. And Paul and Barnabas, they were full of courage. That's why someone today, don't be full of anxiety. Don't be full of fear. Be full of courage. And they boldly replied. They said, listen, we brought you the message first, but you rejected it. Someone right now may be having a hard time in life because you've been rejected. Maybe you were rejected by someone you were dating. You were thought that they were Mr. or Mrs. Right, and they rejected you. Maybe you were rejected at work. You gave everything, and they terminated you. You were rejected. Maybe it was with friends or family over these past couple of years. You start talking politics and you're like, I've been rejected. And as people, we can be reaction machines where we're rejected. And so we start reacting out of hurt, or we start reacting out of pain. But rather than react, what if we respond? Where it's not just an emotional outburst, but we're actually thinking about how we are going to respond. You see, rejection is an opportunity. I want you to get that. You may think it's over, that because they broke your heart, it's over. Because they terminated you and didn't even give you like 2 weeks pay, that it's over. You think because they were your friends for so long and they rejected you, it's over. But rejection is an opportunity. Oh, yes, it is. You can redirect. Maybe in life you thought you knew the way, you thought you knew the path, and just like if you're driving and you got maps telling you where to go, and all of a sudden it's like, wait, hold on, roadblock, it's closed ahead, I can't go this way. You start turning, redirect, there's another way. You see, God has called us to show his love in this world. In fact, Paul quotes Isaiah here in his first message in Acts. He's saying, I've made you a light. This is Jesus saying, I have made you a light. I remember being a little kid, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Our light may seem little, but we need to let it shine. Hide it under it. No, we need to stop hiding our lights and let this light shine so that people can discover that there is salvation available. We're called to shine this light everywhere and to everyone. And you might be like, but you don't understand my life. You don't understand of the mistakes I've made, the bad decisions I've made, how messed up my past is. Well, this is Paul, who was there at the killing of Stephen. He dragging Christians off to prison, persecution, doing horrible things. And if God can shine his light through Paul, God can shine his light through anyone. Here's the thing. I found God's perfect light shines perfectly through imperfect people. And you might be like, you don't understand. I have flaws. The cracks in our life. It's almost as if God's light shines beautifully through the cracks in our own life. A courageous faith is a contagious faith. But there are some things we need to shake off. And it's at this moment here in this passage that the leaders, they stirred up a violent mob. Do we know anything about mobs today? Do we see violent mobs taking place around the world? This was including many prominent and wealthy people. This was people with money, people of influence, helping back this thing, helping fund this thing. It's like mobs. Here's the thing about mobs. The group of people, at one point they're for you, at the next moment they're against you. They persecuted and ran Paul and Barnabas out of town. It's not if persecution comes and opposition comes, it's when persecution and opposition comes. And so we can look at this and think, so were Paul and Barnabas a failure here? I don't think so. You see, the outcome is God's responsibility. Obedience is ours. They did what God called them to do. As we help people, whether they're receptive to it or not, doesn't mean we're successful or not. If that's people God's calling us to reach, that's great. If we start an expression reaching people in this area and it works, that's great. If it doesn't, as long as God called us to go there and it doesn't, and we shift and we go somewhere else, that's totally fine. The outcome is God's responsibility. Obedience is ours. And here's what they did. They shook the dust off their feet. I want to ask you today, what do you need to shake off? Maybe there's some hurt. And if you explain it, I would understand why you're hurting. But will you shake off that hurt? Maybe there's some disappointment because life hasn't gone the way you thought it was going to go. Some disappointment because people said they would be there for you and they weren't. But maybe you need to shake off that disappointment. Maybe for you there's something serious, and it's like it's like dust is built up over all these years. And just like when I walked into my grandparents' garage, the thing was covered in dust, and you're covered in that hurt. you're covered in that severe depression because of all these years. And I'm sorry, but would you dust that off? Would you shake it off? Shake it off. God, why? Because you can move on. Well, you're like, well, why are you saying this? Because God called Paul and Barnabas to another city. I want you to know you can move on because there's another city. Here's what this means in your life. There's another opportunity. Maybe they terminated you at that job, but there's another place that you're going to be successful to work at. Maybe they left you. You thought you were going to marry them, but God says, I got another person who's going to be the greatest, who's going to be the perfect partner for you. You can shake that off. You can move on. You can step into this next opportunity that God has for you. And I love it because at this moment, it says that there was joy. You see, a sign that God is moving is boldness and joy. Some people have boldness, but you look at them and you're like, there's no joy. Some people have joy, but there's no boldness. And we need boldness and joy. If we can just make up in our minds today, we're going to shake it off and we're going to step forward into the opportunity that God has for us.